All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Masters of ITAD. So today's conversation is actually going to be a little different than the usual interviews that I do on the show. And that's because last week was the 2026 ITAD Summit in Las Vegas. There was a lot to take in this year between the sessions, the networking conversations, and just seeing where companies are putting their attention. You start to get a pretty good sense of where the ITAD industry is heading. So really, I just wanted to talk through some of the biggest takeaways. And to do that, we're joined today by Darrell Fleming-Kendall, Executive Director of the Global ITAD Alliance and one of the people behind the ITAD Summit. Darrell's been in the ITAD and recycling space for over a decade, and he's directly involved in what's happening across the industry. So Darrell, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Obviously after the event, we've got a little bit of an opportunity to kind of relive the magic and talk about, some of the big takeaways from the industry and how things are changing and what direction the industry is going. So I appreciate you recognizing the value of that.
Yeah. And where are you joining us from, Darrell?
I'm at home today. I go into a decompression mode after a couple of days. I'm in Cleveland, east side of Cleveland. And so I decompress for a couple of days after putting on the show. And so hanging out with the kids and might go to the fair later today. We'll see.
Yeah. All right, sweet. Well, so I'll start the summer, overall, right? I think this is my fourth year attending, but I always find it interesting at these summits where the best information really, it doesn't necessarily come from a specific session. It's really the conversations at the booths, the dinners, side tables, and just hearing what people are dealing with in their businesses right now. So I guess, did you feel, anything noticeably different this year than the previous years?
Yeah, and I agree with you completely. I mean, look, I spent a lot of time curating the educational programming. This year we had 26 sessions, and we kind of looked comprehensively at what's going on in the industry and how we create, a collection of sessions. And, the 87 speakers we brought in kind of represent a whole range of experience and expertise. But to your point, the conversations outside of there are just as valuable, just as meaningful, and just as productive in terms of moving the industry. And the big takeaway I had this year is we're at an inflection point in the industry. ITAD Summit really, even up till last year, was a lot of very sort of business focused, right? What my company does, how my company is working. And this year, for the first time, and I'm not really sure if it's like a natural evolution or if it's because the GIA has kind of, we formed the GIA and we've been really identifying opportunities to promote the industry as a whole versus, we love to talk about collaboration in the face of competition, but the conversations really reflected that this year, right? 2,200 people were there, and every time I was walking around, people were talking about, advocacy on behalf of the industry or what the industry's role is going to look like in 5 years, and kind of recognizing that we have an elevated opportunity for a lot of reasons, material sustainability being one of them, but, geopolitical issues being another. But the conversation has really evolved from like, what is my company doing and how can my company work with yours to what is the industry doing and what is our role within that? And I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, there's still a perception outside the industry that ITAD means come and pick up my old computers, right? But there's so much more happening before anything actually is getting recycled. So, I mean, it kind of sounds like ITAD companies are becoming more like a full life cycle management style of business. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, and really interesting. I sat on one of the two panels that I sat on was titled something along the lines of the ITAD industry identity crisis, right? And looking at exactly what you're talking about, right? We love to tie ourselves to, like, I guess what would be the kind of lowest version of what we're doing, which is recycling. Not that recycling is bad or not valuable. It just, there's so much opportunity. There's so much that we do before a device that gets to recycling. To your point about life cycle, we kind of joked in there that eventually it might become the Lifecycle Summit, which I don't know that anybody wants to move on from ITAD Summit. I think it's a nice little brand, but we did talk about how words matter, right? Life cycle versus end of life, and ITAD is ITAD really the word we want to identify the industry with, like. And so, it was a very interesting conversation. I do think as an industry, and this is part of my, big, I guess, lofty goals for 2026, 2027 with GIA is really putting together the script, the music, if you will, the orchestration on how companies talk about our industry. And not that every company is going to talk about it the same. I often use the example of an orchestra, and every instrument is different, and every instrument has a place in the orchestra. But if everybody's reading from the same sheet of music, it makes a beautiful sound that the audience can connect to.
Yep.
And I think really that's one of our big goals is really just to figure out how do we talk about the industry in a way that elevates us to the spot that we should be based on the activities that we're engaged in on a day-to-day basis, and so therefore getting away from like the high-tech Sanford and Son image that I think we, nostalgically cling to occasionally as we talk about what we do.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, there was some other conferences going on in Vegas at the same time. Like I was able to make it over to the 4AI conference at the Venetian, but it always amazes me, people who are in the tech industry, not necessarily the ITAD industry, but when you mention the term ITAD, a lot of people are like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Right.
It's like, how do you not know? Like, it's such a big and growing and thriving industry, especially right now with all the AI infrastructure. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of leading into the next topic is the AI and ITAD. I don't think anyone was able to go very far last week without hearing about AI. And I remember that being a topic of conversation last year as well, but I found this year that the conversation seemed to be getting more practical. I saw deployable systems and tools that utilize artificial intelligence to streamline these processes. So, do you think AI can actually make a big impact in ITAD today?
Yeah. So interestingly, as I looked at the sessions that we curated this year, one of them had AI in the title, right? And this is kind of the evolution that AI has gone through as a part of our industry. Last year we had several that had AI kind of in there in some capacity, but AI was mentioned, I think, I don't have full confirmation of this, AI was mentioned in all 26, right? So AI has gone from, a sort of novelty niche conversation where we're talking about it in specific terms about how can we integrate it into the industry, into integration to the point where it literally every topic that we talked about, whether it was data destruction or the identity issue or advocacy or critical minerals, AI is part of the conversation. It's just it's woven into the fabric of the industry at this point, and so it's moved from a niche topic to the core, and I think that's big, and I think that's important, and obviously. That's not going to change. I think there's going to be a lot of, like with any major kind of monumental shift in the way things are done, we'll go through a Wild West phase, and then we'll go into a level of controlled deployment and things like that, where it's a little bit less experimental and a little bit more tried and true. Yeah. But I think the other thing when we think about AI in our industry is the opportunity. We're in a unique position where on the back end, AI is going to be a boon for our industry because the hardware side of it is such a big change in the hardware that needs to be deployed and things like that. So
yep.
It's not going anywhere. It's a big topic, and it's just part of who we are now. Will always, I think, forever be a part of who we are now.
That was a perfect transition because the next thing I was going to talk about was the AI infrastructure refresh cycles. It's a whole other side of AI. Especially is especially interesting for the ITAD industry. Everyone talks about the massive investment going into AI infrastructure, but eventually there's also going to be an enormous amount of equipment coming out, or already is. So how big of an opportunity do you think the AI data center build out creates for the secondary hardware market?
I mean, it's obviously, when we think about just how much hardware is going into this industry and the AI boom, it obviously, I love to use the metaphor of the pie gets bigger, everybody's piece gets bigger, and we don't have to cannibalize each other's business, right?
Yeah.
While also still growing. And this is I think the largest driver of that growth. I would say, we have a huge opportunity as we look at, whatever the number actually is, 22% of electronic devices currently being, put back into the stream. There's a huge opportunity to grow there as well, but there's just the scope of the data centers and the hardware that goes into that, I think is just, it changes the conversation remarkably.
Yeah, I think, I'm almost more interested in asking like, hey, what is all that new infrastructure replacing? Because there's still value in a lot of that displaced hardware, and somebody has to figure out how to get it into the hands of the next user before that value disappears. Another thing that was pretty cool is all the live selling that was going on. There was actually, equipment being sold on the summit floor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that going to start to be more common, or is that just kind of, a cycle that will phase out?
We saw that at Mobile Disrupt as well. At Mobile Disrupt, we had eBay and whatnot selling live on the floor, and then at ITAD Summit, TikTok was up on the stage, which was a really cool kind of way to include that nuance to the exhibit hall, and obviously whatnot was there as well. And when you look at e-commerce and the way e-commerce is developing, typically, the U.S. market is 5 years behind the Chinese market. We've kind of seen, us sort of chasing that. And right now, something like 65% of e-commerce that's happening in China is being done via live selling on platforms like TikTok and whatnot and eBay. And I see no reason to believe that's going to, somehow not follow that pattern. I suspect that we'll see a lot more live selling in our industry. I think particularly on those sort of medium range, medium value kind of devices, it's an efficient way to move those products.
Yeah.
And it also.
It's also a good way to bring in a younger generation of people
100%.
Entering the ITAD space too.
And look, if ever there was a way to really push the secondary marketplace, it's meeting the young consumers where they are. I think for my generation and my parents' generation, certainly Refurbished and remanufactured both have kind of the connotation of something that was once busted or whatever. Mm-hmm. I think for the next generation, there's going to be a lot of embracing of the secondary marketplace, and so getting those devices in front of them where they are and where they're buying anyway is, I think is very important.
Well said. And you had mentioned China about a minute ago, so. Another thing that I saw from this summit is a push to keep more critical materials here in the United States rather than having them leave the country. And I know it's easy to say, keep all the material in the U.S., right? But somebody actually has to process it. Do you think that we have the infrastructure today to do that at scale in the United States?
Today, no. Is it developing? Yes. I mean, I'll use the example of metals, recycled metals, right? For decades, we've relied on export as a means of processing a lot of the particularly less valuable metals, right? We sell it to another market, right, overseas, for pennies on the dollar, and then turn around and buy it back for dollars on the penny once it's been processed. And there's only a set amount of resources in the ground for us to dig out, and really it's not a sustainable model. And I think the same thing is true of the critical minerals. Like once we have them in our space, in our market, it's not a sustainable solution to start sending them back out, and we need to do a better job of harvesting them. And certainly, I think, legislatively and regulatory on the regulatory side, that can drive investment in infrastructure so that we do develop the capability and fairly quickly. I mean, right? Like we love to talk about, it's 5 years out or whatever, but 5 years out starts from today if we decided to make that change. And if we don't, then we just keep pushing that 5 years further down the road. So I think it is important as we look at geopolitical issues and some of the things that are happening globally to if we're going to maintain our control and our ability to consume the way we have been as a market, then we're going to need to make some changes in the way that we are harvesting and retaining those critical minerals that are really driving our entire information boom.
Yeah. And if you transition that to specifically GPUs, which is a big topic right now, I actually had a few people ask me directly about the ability to ship GPUs to other countries, specifically China. I'm wondering, did you see that come up at all, or anybody ask you about that?
I didn't have any conversations about that. I think primarily because everybody recognizes my forte is putting on shows and running the association and kind of so a lot of those like kind of nitty gritty in the trenches conversations elude me. But it was a topic of conversation in no fewer than 4 or 5 panels, right? Mm-hmm. The critical minerals panel that Andrew Kroger and Sanyukta from Microsoft, it came up there. It came up in the conversation that Corey had. I know it was referenced there, and there were a couple others. It definitely is a primary topic of conversation, and as we look at trade policy and as I said, geopolitical issues, and it's going to continue to rise, right?
Yep, and it's tricky to navigate that question, right? It's not like there's a blanket rule saying, hey, you can't ship GPUs overseas. It really comes down to what GPU it is, where it's going, who's actually buying it. So I think the answer is really, if you're in ITAD and you're trying to sell these units, you really just have to know exactly what you have and where you can legally send it. So being informed is one of the best ways to go about that. And attending ITAD Summit is one of the best ways to be informed. So
and GIA too. I mean, like, look, we're deploying in the next couple of weeks what we're kind of calling our membership hub, which will also be sort of it will house like an information a resource library, but also a kind of a networking forum where members can interact with each other and have conversations around things exactly like this. Like, hey, we're looking at sending material to XYZ. We're not entirely sure what the process or policy is around that. Anybody have experience, right? And that's just an opportunity, I think in a way that this industry has never done before, to kind of hive mind difficult questions. And so I think it's going to be a great resource as we build it out. It may not be perfect in version 1, but as we build it out, I think it's going to really give our members an opportunity to interact with each other in a way that improves their business and allows them to operate, more soundly.
Sure. And we touched on this in the beginning, but for my last topic that I wanted to mention, relationships in the ITAD industry, right? There's so much talk about AI and automation, but one thing, the summit reminded me of is how relationship driven the industry is. One ITAD company, or one ITAD job can involve logistics companies, data security providers, resellers, the end user, and you need to know who you're working with. So, I mean, in your opinion, how important are strategic partnerships within the ITAD industry?
Look, unless you are operating globally, most of your enterprise suppliers and customers are going to have international requirements on you, and having partners around the world that you can trust to assist you in fulfilling the requirements of those customers and suppliers. I mean, that's huge, and I think we all recognize interacting in person is a very valuable way of kind of solidifying partnerships and creating new partnerships. I mean, the other thing is you don't know what you don't know, and I can't tell you how many people I have the conversation with. There was one woman who was at ITAD Europe, and she said, I didn't even know there was this whole segment of my business that I could essentially find money out of. But I had a conversation at the opening night reception in ITAD Europe with somebody who then was able to unlock that for me. And she was like, I'll never not come to an ITAD Summit or an ITAD Europe because it's paid for just in that one partnership that I found. Yeah. And I think that's just really a perfect example of how this works, right? You can plan all you want to have meetings with this person or that person, but sometimes it's those chance meetings around the shrimp cocktail ice sculpture at the opening reception where you find value that you didn't even know you could find. So
absolutely, you need to know that when something goes wrong, the person on the other side of the phone is actually going to answer. So just like 100%. You said, solidifying and maintaining those relationships that so many of us rely on is just another reason why these summits are so crucial. But yeah, I also wanted to give a shout out to the women in ITAD as well. Their presence was extremely strong, it seemed like, this year. Was there an effort to grow women in ITAD this year intentionally, or is that something that you guys talked about beforehand or have in previous years?
So I would say, I mean, look, Kimberly and Karen are both they are two very, very motivated individuals, and when they put their mind to something, it is going to take off. We added, obviously from a board perspective in GIA, Kelly Hess, who, shout out to her, also ITAD Professional of the Year winner, which was really cool also for the women in ITAD group, right, as a representation. But the three of them, I think, really have embodied, the idea of supporting the women that are in the industry, looking for ways to recruit more female talent to this industry as well, and really rather than, sort of looking at it and saying, we as the women in the industry can, make all these changes ourselves or, whatever. I think they recognize that, the group is not just about the women. It's about, finding the support among the men in leadership positions that can foster and support an environment where women really just want to, flock to the industry and participate in it in ways that we've never seen before. So yeah. I would say, that group, we started it 3 years ago at the ITAD Summit. It's grown each year. And this year, there were 80 women there. Shout out to eBay for sponsoring the Women in ITAD breakfast and panel. I think they recognize the importance of that the women play in this industry. But through GIA we have set aside, kind of carved out a space for the Women in ITAD group, so that whether their employer is a member of GIA or not, women in the industry can get together, network, collaborate, learn, grow, and really look for ways to foster long-term growth from that sort of demographic in our industry. So just really, it was honestly, when I walked in the room to kind of give my just a couple of remarks, I was blown away by the energy. As crazy as the exhibit hall was every day, right, when you walk in and the buzz going on, that Women in ITAD room was you walked out ready to take on the world. It was cool.
I bet. I love it. All right, so in wrapping up, right, so we talked about becoming, ITAD becoming a broader term, AI powered tools making a splash, refresh cycles, downstream restrictions. If you had to take, find one key takeaway from the summit this year, what would it be?
The key takeaway from this year's summit is this industry is really galvanizing around each other and kind of ready, I think, to take the next step in terms of carrying our responsibility as the circular part of the circular economy. I mean, for a decade now, OEMs have really kind of pushed the idea of a circular economy and taken a lot of credit for it. And I think the ITAD, what I heard at the ITAD Summit is, we are the circle. we ensure that circle is closed and that it is a loop, and that material gets back into the stream. And that's not to say that OEMs don't deserve a ton of credit. It's just to say that we are ready to kind of stake our claim in that process and elevate our position within it, so that moving forward, we don't have to tell, when we talk about ITAD, we don't have to tell somebody what we are and use the language that that gets us most quickly to helping them understand. They'll just know what ITAD is and why it's important and why it's valuable. So
I'll second that. It's ITAD seems to be becoming much more integrated into the broader technology life cycle. It's not just what happens when equipment reaches the end of its life anymore. It's part of procurement, infrastructure strategy, security, supply chains, and ultimately how companies extract the most value possible from the technology that they already own. And I think it's a pretty exciting place to be right now. So are there any upcoming shows that you'll be attending where people can connect and network with you?
We'll be at eScrap, so we're excited. We had a nice little partnership with the team at eScrap this year. They were at ITAD Summit Mobile Disrupt, and we're going to their show. And so, I'll be on a panel with Kevin Dillon from ERI and Eric Levine from Iron Mountain and Kelly Hess from CompuCycle. Just again talking about where the industry is going and how we support each other in a collaboration first environment. To the benefit of everybody, right? So excited about that. I'll probably be at a few more, and then of course in March and April we're going to be busy. We got the Reverse Logistics Expo that we're putting on, and then ITAD Europe back in Nice. So pretty excited about all of that.
All over the place.
All over the place.
All right, well, that's a wrap, guys. Thanks for listening to Masters of ITAD this week. Darrell, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation.
Awesome.